It's great to be with
Great.
you. Thank you for taking some time to do this.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've just started to get to know each other. Joel introduced
Yeah.
us, and I know we have a lot in common. And I felt like, your story, your journey is one that will be important for people to hear, and one that I'm certainly excited to learn more about and
Yeah.
get to know you even more so. So thanks again.
No, I'm happy to be here. Um, anytime you have an opportunity to share the things that you've grown and learned from, that's forged who you've become or who you're becoming, is always worthwhile. And to share a piece of your life with other people, hopefully helps them to maybe not make the mistakes you have, or invest in some of the things that you have put your ladder up against the wrong house.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so, and sometimes I think, you kinda can't shortcut it, but, I do hope that's the case, that, people can learn from, each other and, take some comfort and walk away a little better off, so, yeah.
Especially in the environment, Brett, that we live in and we find ourselves today, where so much is creates isolation, separation, comparison, all things that I think lead to misery,
Mhm.
lead to that create fear. So those things often that we pursue very aggressively, or maybe spent decades pursuing, call them success. We find ourselves at the end of that line, instead of feeling like we've obtained success. What we found is we've created separation
Mhm.
when we desire unity to the greatest extent possible.
Mhm.
And in the end, really, we're all the same. And we usually spend a lifetime proving that we're different or
Mhm.
that we're special. And actually, when we succeed, we find that it wasn't success at all.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
these are the things that I think in our world today that creates the very thing that I've really want to dedicate the rest of my life to is helping people to identify and solve trauma. And you know, we founded the Reid Foundation, reaching everybody in distress, as a result of my son's death from um, uh, uh, um, addiction. And I believe that there are things that could be done that I wasn't aware of, and we went everywhere and found every place across the country that we thought would make a difference. When in fact, um, there are there are things that are natural and thousands of years old that are available but currently illegal,
Mhm.
that are offering an awful lot of people hope right now. So
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I know how important of a part of your life and your journey, certainly to the work that you're doing now, your son's death, has played. And I want to talk about that with you. I do. I want to come back to it though, because I'd
yeah,
like
sure.
to really understand you and your path to the work that you're doing today. And so maybe you could just back up a little bit for
Yeah,
us and tell us a little bit about kind of you from a
yeah,
from a early stage,
yeah,
where you were raised and your
sure.
family dynamics,
Yeah,
and tell us
yeah.
about that part of your life.
I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, not very far from here. Came to Columbus in the early '90s to work for the Bush Quayle campaign, and as a result, became executive director of the Ohio Republican Party for a period of time, and started a business of my own that became a national advertising business in American politics. And we've worked in all 50 states. And but 2 years ago, when I became much more serious about what we're doing with the Reid Foundation, I stepped down as the day-to-day CEO. And but there's still a vibrant company there, and I view my job uh, at the company is to lead the leaders and to let go and release and
Mhm.
allow them to do greater things than
Mhm.
perhaps I did. But I spent 25 years building a company that worked for many of the nation's leaders in the United States Senate and House and governors across the country, and that became extraordinarily not only time consuming, but I literally thought that I had to wake up in the morning and put the sun up and
Mhm.
then be ready to put the moon and the stars up at night.
Mhm.
And you turn around and a couple decades are past,
Yeah.
and I have loved that work. I certainly have loved telling people stories
Mhm.
and things that I feel strongly about. That business was really started more than a sense of, gee, we're gonna be successful in the traditional sense, but meaning financially. But because I was always cause oriented. I always believed that there's a greater purpose than yourself, and that that's how you build a team, and that's how you make a difference. And
Mhm.
and uh, uh,
Well, tell me just, kind of as a kid and your family, like, I'm curious, what led you.
I was never a kid. That was
Okay.
probably part of the problem.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
'cause I'm
I mean,
curious,
from the
like.
time I was, uh, I mean, since the time I could remember, 11 years old,
Yeah.
that's what I knew I wanted to do.
Really? Well,
And
tell me about that. What
yeah.
what what was it that you knew you wanted to do? No, I'm curious about this because it's fascinating to me when I hear that people at such a young age, have these insights, and I had it, here and there too, but I didn't know that's what that was, and so I'm curious. For you, you say at 11, you
Yeah.
knew what you wanted to do. Well, like, what was that like, and what was it
I
that you knew you
I mean,
wanted to
from
do?
from the time I could remember, I was, as I said, 11 years old, knocking on doors for the ward city councilman in Mansfield, and thinking that that was the pinnacle of power. And
Were your
public,
parents in
no, no,
politics,
no,
or.
not at all. Actually, my dad worked at General Motors. My mother was a school teacher, and um, my brother was considerably older than I. He'd had a brain damage when he was born, so he was kind of I guess to some extent, I had this sense that I needed to succeed for both of us,
Mhm,
and that probably drove me to a great extent later in life as he aged and got older. Actually, I became the guardian of him eventually,
mhm,
and it was, with him in the last few years of his life, and also that also probably forged a little bit as the precursor to the many of the things that I'm talking about in
mhm,
terms of just understanding real value, understanding that love is really all that matters,
mhm,
understanding that every day we get to make a choice, whether or not we're going to be driven by fear or driven by love,
mhm, yeah,
and he ultimately was an incredible inspiration to me too,
mhm,
in terms of just someone who um, just had an incredible ability to have incredible empathy
mm,
because things didn't have to make sense to him,
mhm,
and um, he led a pretty for limited capacity. He worked for the city of Mansfield. He um, uh, got married. He led a pretty normal life for a guy who probably a doctor's didn't have that kind of expectation for him. But
mhm,
um, I think my mother willed a very just willed him to be
mhm,
more than maybe the world thought he could be. But reality is, who somebody is what their heart says,
mhm,
not what their head says. And
mhm,
and in later in life, I got to see that he led a very successful life
yeah,
because he was filled with love and passion and compassion. And I mean, he was the kind of person too who, if if you weren't paying attention, there'd be homeless people living in his house
Yeah.
because it didn't make sense to him that there were people
Yeah.
who didn't have a place to go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. It's
so I don't
interesting.
know how I got on that
Well,
so early,
yeah,
but those were kind of the years growing up. It gave me a sense of extra responsibility.
sure. Yeah, I think that it's a really important piece, and there's a lot we could talk about with the, kind of measures of success and the things that make sense and why do they really make sense? Maybe they don't make sense. I want to talk about all that with you,
Yeah,
but I want to just kind of continue to come back to this part because I'm fascinated that you're going door to door, like in middle
yeah.
school, high school. This is like a calling for you. It feels like
Well,
that this you were
when I
motivated
was
by
in
your brother,
yeah,
but
yeah,
this is a particular line of work that you
yeah.
chose.
Well, when I was in high school, I mean, I attempted to graduate early so I could work in the as a page in the state senate
Mhm.
and drive back to Mansfield and work in the mayor's office. And I ran for the state legislature at a unbelievable age of 18,
Mm. Wow.
and we actually won a competitive primary and
It's great.
lost the general election, and then ran again in 1986, which was the year I graduated from college, and lost by 3 votes.
Wow.
And had I not lost by 3 votes, I guess I wouldn't have founded and built what became probably in our space the largest political advertising agency in America.
Wow. Amazing. So you started that business at what age?
Well, I started that business after 1994.
Okay.
So I had been executive director of the Republican Party. I'd managed a governor's race in Alabama.
Okay.
I struggled through a little other early lessons and tragedies
Sure.
as well. And I probably started a business because I couldn't find a job
Yeah.
that. I could only find jobs that reported other people.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't want to do that anymore. Yeah. 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 You became unemployable. Yeah. Once you start your
So
business,
I
that
had no
happened to me
choice,
too.
but um, uh, you know, when you don't know what you can't do, I guess you can.
Yeah.
And
You saw an opportunity. I
yeah,
mean, you just
my
saw that you were working with people that were doing it.
yeah.
I'm guessing you thought you could do it better.
Well, it's funny. I always thought that my life would be I'd get elected eventually to Congress, and that would be my life. And but instead, I've elected more than 100 people to Congress across the country,
Mhm.
and so I've actually gotten to live that dream that many people have more than 100 times over, instead of just experiencing it once. And and it's my degree is in radio, television production, and so I was able to. I worked with in 1990, which was Roger Ailes' last year in the political business before they founded Fox TV.
Mhm.
And he was the lead consultant for George Voinovich, who was running for governor at the time, and ultimately the entire Republican ticket, every constitutional office. People now look at Ohio and say it's a red state, but when you really look at history, the truth is, had Bob Taft, who became governor after George Voinovich, not dropped to the Secretary of State's office, and had George Herbert Walker Bush and Lee Atwater, who was chairman of the Republican National Committee, and Bob Bennett, who was chairman of the High Republican Party, and I was the director, had all those things not happened, actually, we wouldn't have controlled the apportionment board at that point that has led to the perpetuation of the Republican Party in the state of Ohio.
Mhm.
So at the time when, just to put things in perspective, the Republican Party was $1 million in debt. We didn't control the state house, or the state senate. Didn't have a majority of the congressional delegation. Didn't have a majority of the Supreme Court. Essentially, had nothing. Mm-hmm. And so, really, that was a very significant turnaround for the state. That which since then the Republican Party has controlled the apportionment board, which draws the state legislative districts, which draws the
Mhm.
congressional districts. So the truth is that the the red state sense in Ohio really was earned and built and didn't happen by accident. And probably we would be much more of a competitive state if that had not been the case, because success builds success. And when you have success, you raise money, and then you continue to outspend the opposition, and you control the process. And so, but really, this is a state that when you look at it, is there's a significant labor state. There's significant poor rural areas. This has the potential to be extraordinarily competitive. But there's only 2 times in my lifetime that I can remember really that I believe that there was a true realignment. In 1980 with Ronald Reagan, where Reagan, it was called Reagan Democrats, and then actually in 2016, which was different, but the realignment when Donald Trump was elected, and frankly, most of those people were Democrat voters who became
Sure.
behaviorally Republicans.
Well, let me ask you about that, 'cause, I have voted Republican and Democrat throughout my life. And, if I'm being honest, I think, in
Oh,
the
don't be honest. That would be boring. I don't intend to be.
well, I may be, being honest with myself as I say this, but, I think that when I was younger, and 18, 22, voting in, my first elections, presidential elections, I'm not sure exactly what I was really basing my decisions on. Maybe it was family, or maybe it was, the media, or maybe it was friends. I mean, right? I was probably not consciously aware of what it is I believed. Um, and then, voting for people that I felt were in alignment with my beliefs. Now, I mean, I there were some issues that I felt, that I knew what I was voting on, and those maybe ultimately were the deciding factors. But I voted both Republican and Democrat, and I really kind of fancied myself as I got older as an independent. And in recent years, I've shifted and really feel more aligned with the Democratic Party. And and yet, when we fast forward and talk about some of the subjects that you were mentioning earlier, about we're all the same, and love, and the things that really matter, and maybe kind of the way that we look at the homeless, and right. So I guess I'm, still pretty passionate about the fact that the biggest problem we have is that we don't listen to each other, and we're not curious enough, and we're not trying to find the middle ground and come together. And I believe that's what is it's going to take. And it might ultimately get worse before it gets better. And maybe I'm naive, and it's wishful thinking, and it's never going to happen, and that's certainly possible. But I guess I want to be curious with you, and really understand what it was at the early ages that had you identifying or interested in the Republican Party.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me challenge you a little bit. When you say you're an independent, let me tell you what that means in the state of Ohio in terms of it means you don't participate
Yeah,
in
right, because
in
you
in
can't.
primaries.
Right.
So
Which is part of the reason why I
yeah,
chose to
but
pick
I
party.
can tell you that 90% based on apportionment and redistricting, and the reality is that 90% of the state legislative districts or congressional districts across this country are drawn for one party to hold them or another. So the primary election is totally dictates who's going to get elected in the general election. So you need to participate
Sure.
in the primary process, or frankly, your vote is irrelevant in the general election, at least legislatively or in congressional races and state legislative races, which is going to dominantly affect the policy. And a, a person who's a congressman from Georgia for 30 years, it will have more impact unbeknownst to you, and more power as they become increased in seniority and influence in Washington and become the chairman of a committee. So, someone who calls themselves an independent doesn't go vote in the primary, isn't participating in the election of that person who is nearly anonymous nationally, who is actually affecting public policy tremendously. So, there is no such thing as an independent. There's, that's someone who chooses not to participate in the primary based on voter registration laws in the state of Ohio.
Understand.
So, but what you're talking about is general ideology or philosophy, which is what people tend to mean when they talk about being independent minded. Hopefully, I guess I've evolved somewhat on this as well, in that, it was all about winning, and this is our side and this is their side, and it's a holy war. And then after a couple decades of that, you realize, that's what's created what we have, which is, it used to be on. I used to say people like me didn't belong in government, meaning we're campaign warriors. And there used to be, an environment where Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would sit down, or the last time the budget was balanced actually was Bill Clinton was president and John Kasich was budget chairman, and Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House. And that was the first time since man had walked on the moon that we had actually balanced the federal budget. It happened one time in our lifetime.
I know. Yeah.
And so, but that was a day which there was a spirit of bipartisan. There was an understanding that on Inauguration Day, governing began and the campaign was over. People like me were, focused then on the next election. And today, you have to say, in 2000, in 2016, after Trump was elected, for the first time in history, there was 3 weeks later from an inauguration, a campaign rally. That would have been unheard of, because that was a time to build a unity in government. That was a time to bring people together to solve problems. And we continued, I think for the first time at that level, to continue the partisanship and focused separation, and continued essentially running a campaign. So that significantly changed things. Also, as I alluded to a little earlier, that was also an election where there was a realignment, meaning people who dominantly were Democrats voted Republican.
Sure.
And so it changed the dynamics phenomenally. So, just as you look at some of the history, significant, things changed in terms of our attitude, approach, and belief that there was a honeymoon period where we actually looked for commonality or compromise. Right. And I think that radically has changed, and that changed in 2016.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, I hear you. I've seen that, happen, and seems to be getting worse, not better.
Well, but Brett, it really ties back to the other subject that we really haven't gotten to. But the reality is as an individual, we don't really make changes until we suffer.
Yeah.
And I think as a society, we don't develop a thirst to bring change or develop a consciousness that brings about a true change. So I think the misery that's being experienced is for a greater purpose, just as it is true in our individual lives. And so I really believe that the kind of confrontation that we've had, it's unprecedented. Perhaps has to happen, or had to happen, for us to say, hey, there is going to be a change, because misery can't continue, and it has to be experienced enough to demand and dictate a change.
Yeah, I I believe that too, and, I've listened to, Charles Eisenstein and others talk about, the more beautiful world our heart desires and, the pain and suffering that maybe is leading us to, a new world, and I believe that, I really do. I also, am a pretty privileged, white guy, who has kind of everything I need, and worry sometimes that the true suffering, is really beyond my comprehension. But as a society, I do believe that and hope that's true. And I want to come back to something you said about how you've evolved in your thinking, and I'm curious, um, really about kind of the part of your life that was leading to the evolution. You mentioned that for decades we're in this role, and the sun and the star and the moons, and I get what you mean. Like, especially in the world of politics,
Yeah,
big
or in any
decisions are being
business.
made in any business. But in your case, you're really striving, working hard, and actually making a difference in who is elected, who's making policy, who's running the country, who's impacting millions of lives, right? So I get the feeling of that and the reality of that. And what I'm curious about is the part where you kind of wake up and realize a couple decades have gone by, and or tell me, about the evolution
Well,
part.
that has, I think, more to do with um, your individuality and a change of heart in terms of what do I really want to spend my sweat and energy and passion on. And when you see that, and it also coincides with experiencing the greatest pain that
Hmm.
one could experience
Yeah.
in, you know, in your son dying.
Mhm.
And the reality is that there are 100,000 people that are going to commit suicide this year. There are 100,000 people who are going to die of uh, addiction. There are 25 people a day who are going to commit suicide from PTSD who have been veterans. And you suddenly have to think, hmm, what really matters? What will say? What will happen that really makes your life make a difference?
Mhm.
And I've spent decades getting to know public policy makers and help them succeed. And I'm now going to see those same people and having different conversations.
Mhm.
And I'm able to go see them and talk about things like emerging therapies that I believe the root cause of addiction is trauma.
Mhm.
And I believe that there's cures for trauma, and they're 3,000 years old. And I'm watching an organization called Vet Solutions that's sending people, 30 people a week. They raise money to send 30 people a week for ibogaine treatments in Mexico, and they come back universally healed from the deepest PTSD from having served our country. And the same things are also available for other people who have trauma that's the root cause of addiction. And in this country, for 50 years or more, we have basically, because Richard Nixon's desire to get even with the war protesters, and two research professors at Harvard, that we essentially make these things, ibogaine, ayahuasca, other things, Schedule One drugs, and as a result, ended the research
Mhm.
that could be the healing of the most important crisis in our country.
Yeah, and I wanna talk, all about that. I
Yeah.
do because I think you and I have, shared beliefs and maybe, believe the exact same things
Yeah.
about, trauma and addiction and these medicines and the healing power. And frankly, it can be, we talked about this a little bit before, it can be dangerous. It needs to be, and I know this is why you are doing what you're doing. Um, but I do believe it can lead to the kind of new world that we're talking
Yeah.
about. But I want to come back to that. I wanna.
Well, but let me stop you for one
Sure.
second. Let me tell you why it can be dangerous. Because it's Schedule One drug, and we have eliminated real research. The only research that really is taking place at a significant level is entrepreneurial assisted research. There is very limited ability for NIH and for real government funding of research because of the hate of one man. And Bob Halderman, who was chief of staff to Nixon at the time, said, "We know these things aren't Schedule One. To be Schedule One, you have to have, it has to have absolutely no medical value, and it has to be addictive." Well, ayahuasca will make you throw up and potentially give you diarrhea. There's nothing addictive about that.
Mhm.
But it allows for the mind and body and soul to be purged. When people say they put things behind them, they have actually stuffed them in.
Yeah.
That's actually the cause of trauma.
Right.
And so, until the schedules change, and what we're doing at the Reid Foundation, one of the principal things we're doing with our team in Washington is I've met with 40, 50 members of Congress in the last 6 months, talking about the importance of these things truly being medical research, that the scheduling be changed so that research can be done. It's dangerous because there should be billions of dollars spent to solve the problem of trauma, anxiety, depression, PTSD,
Yeah.
as it stands, until that happens, and that's what I'm gonna pursue. That's what I'm gonna do the rest of my life,
Yeah.
is to see that change.
Well, yeah, and, yeah, we can just kind of flush this out, and I wanna come back and talk
Yeah,
a little bit about your son and that experience as much as you're comfortable,
yeah,
um, because I
I'm
think
pretty
it.
transparent
Okay,
at
good,
this point
yeah.
in life.
Well, I'm sure it's hard, but, I think it's important, but I will just say that, or ask you, don't you think that the reason why there is so much resistance to what you're trying to do with the schedules and the legalization for the research? I mean, which is an important point I want you to clarify. I mean, right?
Right.
We're trying to get the money to be able to be spent so that the research can be done, so that then the medicines can be used in a way that will be held at the highest standard. But don't you think the reason why the resistance is such is directly related to the trauma of the individuals that are involved in making those
Yeah, of course.
decisions?
Yeah.
You know?
But also, you have to understand, having spent a lifetime in the political business, politicians are the great followers. They're not the great leaders.
And why is
And
that?
well, it's because they want to get elected.
Right,
And
but
so
but why are they
yeah.
so
Well, it's
interested?
because they're operating from fear.
Right,
It's what I said from the beginning.
right,
We have a choice. Either we
right,
make decisions from love, or we make decisions from fear. And when you make decisions from fear based on what you think is most popular, or what you think the lowest common denominator is that most people believe in,
right.
um, or what you can make people believe, and you get separated from the truth, and you no longer become the chief advocate for the greatest good.
Right. But, I guess what I'm kinda drilling down on, I agree with you. It's fear. And so then you think, "Well, why are they so afraid?" Well, don't you think it's about this, like, societal conditioning, or this conditioning that happens at childhood, which really is a trauma? And if you don't wanna believe or call it a trauma, I'm not saying you, people, we have what's now a generational conditioning that is fear-based. It's us versus them. It's pervasive in our leadership. And it's almost like and I don't know the people that you're talking to in Congress, but it almost seems like if they could or have worked with these medicines,
Yeah.
then maybe there could be some massive change.
Yeah.
And maybe
Well,
some of them are.
I think there's continually a greater awareness because there is a greater obvious need because there's increased misery. It goes back to what we talked about. Perhaps we need to experience collective misery to wake up, and I think all those things are contributing. I mean, the reality is people have trauma because they were also raised by people who had trauma,
Correct.
and it's generational.
Correct.
And I happen to believe God knows what He's doing.
Mhm.
So there's
I tend to agree
there's a
with you.
creator above and beyond all
Yeah,
else.
yeah. You
And
you can't forget that part, and when you do these medicines, you learn that,
Yeah.
and you learn it in a way that's beyond just this, like, idea.
Yeah.
It's an embodied experience, and you, yet can forget, right? Because
Yeah.
you get into this, like, "Well, we gotta get this and that and done," and, but it's all part of it, and I guess, to that point, let's circle back.
Yeah.
You talked about how this is the work of your life,
Yeah.
and how the suffering and the tragedy, might be necessary, the misery to get to, and yet, you would never wish or ask for the kind of suffering and misery you've
Yeah.
experienced, and I really commend you for seeing it, finding some purpose, coming out of it. But I don't wanna skip over the pain and the
Yeah.
suffering, and
Well,
then
Brett, each of us are here for a reason that's greater than ourselves. And, you know, um, you wouldn't necessarily write the path you would. You know, I had my firstborn son who, um, you know, never lost his personality, his love, uh, even through all of the difficulty that he'd walked. And um, I had spent, learning. You learn about addiction, and you learn through traditional ways, and you learn about the healings. And I'd spent over $1 million at the finest rehabs and across America. And the reality is there's not a rehab in this country that has better than a 4% recovery rate. And so after years of being in Asheville, North Carolina, and Prescott, Arizona, and Huntington Beach, California, and I can keep naming them, um, I said, I got to find something else. There has to be something else. And, I ended up 10 years ago uh, with Reid and a friend of his in Peru. And, ironically, I'd gone through a very difficult time in my life and business, actually, that I'd had a betrayal beyond any explanation that created PTSD. Basically, for a long while, I didn't even want to go to an office I owned, and all this happened at the same time. And I went with Reid to heal him, and I was healed from PTSD from the experience. So not only did I see something that offered him renewed life, and I believe his life was extended at least for 5 years as a result. But I too had a transformational change,
Mhm.
and so it taught me that there's hope, that the stories we tell ourselves aren't our reality
Mhm.
unless we allow them to be our reality.
Mhm.
That there is a God who's given you a purpose, and that your passion and your drive is so much more important than the way the world maybe rates its success. And um, so, really, that kind of personal experience, both in terms of how it affected him and how it affected me, in terms of a realignment of mind, body, and spirit. And it gave me an understanding that I wouldn't have had any other way. So, had he not walked the path he had, I would not have walked the path I had. And then I have to say that every significant I've had the privilege of being able to to do that, to go to Peru and Ecuador and Costa Rica, other places that have where you can legally seek this kind of help. And every transformational stage in my life really has been, with the help of these medicines.
Yeah.
And you know, I've from one experience with ayahuasca, I walked away and never drank again, and that's been over 2.5 years. And I would never have said I was an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is, um, I was killing pain and trauma, with with the acceptable way in society that we can do it collectively and call it fun and say cheers. But the truth is that and alcohol stays in your system 27 days. A lot of people have that wine on Friday, and really what it's doing is uh, 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 um, it's not really causing you to be relaxed. It's it's really preventing. It's allowing it to stay in your system,
Yeah.
so you're not having relapse.
Right.
There are a lot of things that you will not face, that you'll choose to stuff in or
Mm-hmm.
hide, that this really allows your spirit to open up and to a level of new awakening.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing all of that. And, you mentioned this extension of your son's life that, you believe his experience in Peru extended his life. And, what I'm thinking is uh, the importance, and again, we were talking about this before, of people realizing that these medicines are not cure-alls. They're not silver bullets.
Well,
It's
especially not when they're not researched appropriately,
right.
and we haven't done, an iota of what we can do. So
Right.
it's like I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but we don't know because we have incredible ability to work through many of those things. And basically, the American government has said, we're not going to do that. And so the truth is, uh, I think if we really were serious about it and things were changing in the schedule and we really had billions of dollars of government resources being spent on true research, we wouldn't be at the margin talking about,
Yeah.
gee, this isn't the answer all. Right? I don't know that it isn't.
Well,
And the reason I don't know is because we haven't tried.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Well, no, I actually, yeah. No, I think you're making a good point. Because I don't know that they're not either, but in the way that they are available now without the research, without the proper facilitation. I'm really passionate about making sure that when I say that I believe these medicines could be the cure all for society, that people also don't run out and do a bunch of mushrooms with a friend on a Saturday and think that they're
but
gonna,
that's not what we're talking about. If we actually had real true government research, if we had the schedule change and NIH were spending billions of dollars a year um, doing legitimate research, we wouldn't have people who are desperate for help illegally providing, help to people who feel like they have no help. we can do something about it. And we're not as a society. So as a result, kind of what's happening is what you're describing.
Mhm.
Um, I guess in my world, the world that I see, is that um, God's natural healing in plant medicines um, are commonly available at, you know, with all the scientific abilities and medical research that we have, that healing can be provided safe and appropriate, and it's not just an experience.
Yeah.
And so I see a different world, I guess. I don't see the world as it is. I see the world as it can be.
I gotcha.
And so I understand, you're having to look at it in the context of the reality that we live in. I don't choose to live in reality.
Yeah.
I choose to live in what I believe will be.
Yeah.
Thousands of years ago in the indigenous communities, there weren't such things as addiction.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is, Brett?
Yeah,
Why do you think that is?
there also wasn't such a thing as, legislation and policy and lobbying and all the,
Yeah.
crap that, we have to go through just to get back to, things.
Well, it's man controlling people,
Yeah.
creating his own world.
Yeah.
And perhaps all of this is the beginning of the phase of a new world
Yeah.
and a new reality.
I agree with you. You know, I like the world that you're living in. I do. And
Come join me.
well, I no, I actually, I live there too. I tend to, um, kind of, keep one foot in both. And that's not something that I am, kind of bragging about. It's just where I'm at. And because I am in the world where we are today, in part, I see and hear a lot of things that scare me. And what I do with that is want to be with people like you who are doing the work that you're doing so that we can change that reality, you know? But I can't not talk about it
Yeah,
because I worry
of course.
that
Yeah,
people are going to
yeah,
experience
yeah.
unnecessary pain and suffering because
Absolutely,
they're
Brett.
not doing things in the proper way.
I agree. And, interesting enough, I also live in both worlds. I have one foot in both worlds. I mean, that's why at the Reid Foundation here in Ohio, well, while we're focused on these things in Washington in terms of those policy changes, here in Ohio, we're in two state prisons. We just had conversations with Ohio State University yesterday with their rehab folks doing music therapy, rehabs across the state doing music therapy. We had a concert last June that we had 1,000 people at. That was a community concert that we put on to talk about the healing nature of music therapy. So we've hired music therapists that that also are dealing with trauma with people who currently are struggling with addiction and other issues
Mhm.
in Ohio. That every week on behalf of the Reid Foundation, we have music therapists somewhere, um, uh, working with people who are also dealing with trauma and see the power of music.
Mm.
So, I mean, the point is we are doing things that we can do legally now.
Yeah.
We're also advocating for things that aren't legal that should be.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm actually curious to learn more about that because part of the reason why I say they're not, a cure all silver bullet is because I do believe that sometimes you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
It's a process. Sometimes it
How many
takes.
people have to die before we do something?
Well, I guess the question is. Um, are there a lot of things that can be done? Meaning, even if you, I'll just speak from my experience, taking medicine by itself has not been the most important part of my healing. It has been a massive part of my healing, but without the other modalities, without things like music and nature and therapy, right? Collectively,
But
there's a lot.
hasn't that medicine made more powerful and made you aware of the importance of
Yes.
nature? I
Yes.
mean, it's all
Yes.
tied together.
It is. It is. It
Yeah.
is. But that's why I just was curious about, the music aspect of what you're
Yeah.
doing because,
Absolutely.
there are things like music and other things that, really do make a difference
Yeah.
in people's healing.
Well, I'll be honest to say, I mean, that Reid was very passionate about music. That was such a central part of his life that brought him so much joy. Honestly, his brothers have felt much more strongly and are much more excited about what we're doing in music therapy than some of these other things that I've involved myself in that I feel like also need to change from a public policy point of view. But in a practical way, I just 2 weeks ago at a facility in Knox County. What a beautiful thing! I got to go watch the music therapists that we've hired from the Central Ohio Music Therapy, you know, literally bringing people to life. We did a rehab right here across the street. Actually, we had a 10-day program last year um, where in 10 days, people who literally went from just with music and art therapy, who went from like going through the motion to coming to life.
Yeah.
And we saw the difference.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that here at Gravity, and it's not necessarily with addicts specifically, but it's just with human beings,
Yeah.
give them access to art and music and other healing modalities that
Yeah.
just improve their life. I believe that sometimes can be a stepping
Quality of
stone.
life, increasing the quality of life,
Yeah,
bringing people together,
yeah,
creating a unity,
yeah,
having shared interests.
yeah,
The basic, simple reality of who we are as humanity.
yeah.
When are we, when we're engaged with other people and we're creating, when we are imitating our creator by creating, by
Mhm.
being a co-creator with the creator is
Amen.
when we become who we were created to be.
Correct.
And
Who you're
yeah,
born as.
and that's how you also eliminate trauma. So yeah, I perhaps get more excited and talk about these other things
Yeah,
because they have been ignored
yeah.
because our society basically, um, you know, uh, basically said, we're going to punish
Bad.
people and
Yeah.
we're not even going to look at these things.
Drugs,
So
bad, yeah.
we can do all these other things and we need to and we have to and we have to be responsible. We have to abide by the laws.
Yeah.
We have to encourage people to get the help. But I want them to know what can be, but also I want to be a part of what we can do right now. And that's why in a practical sense here in Ohio we are doing those
Yeah.
things.
Tell me, I listen, I totally agree with you that, you do what you can do now, and the big change is gonna occur, when we do this right with the medicine. Talk a little bit about where you are in the process. You mentioned meeting with all the legislators. The focus is on, changing the schedule,
Yeah,
right? And
and
so
that's at the
talk
federal
about.
level, yeah, because that has to be changed at the federal level. There are things happening in various states
Mhm.
on this, and there are, and I at the Reid Foundation, I view all of these organizations as they see each other somewhat as competitors, and they have a different philosophy the decrim folks and versus people who are looking more at MDMA and frankly there are ketamine clinics that are legal in various states that have had great success, um, but instead of getting involved in that argument on the state to state level, I prefer to have been focused because I've spent my lifetime getting to know people, electing people, and so I've been spending more time in Washington as it relates to the federal change to bring more uniformity to real research that can go on at the great research centers across this country. There already has been. Johns Hopkins is doing a lot.
Mhm.
We actually have, I think, have a very encouraging um, uh, professor here in Alan Davis at
Yeah,
Ohio State University that's doing some beautiful work,
right.
treating, understanding how to deal with PTSD and veterans. But what I want to see is um, uh, that at a level that's 100 times what
Yeah.
we're looking at right now.
And just to kind of play that out a little bit, I'm curious, you mentioned the decrim efforts and the state efforts and your focus on the federal level and getting this uniform. What if you were to kinda, look into the future, where, we are living in the world that, you and I have one foot in.
Yeah.
Um, what's the path? I mean, what kinda timeline do you think this
Oh,
is? And,
I think a lot's going to happen very on quick short order.
Mhm,
Um, uh, um, I know that in the new Congress, there's actually going to be a psychedelic caucus in the U.S. House,
mhm.
which I believe 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats will join together to begin serious conversation. I think that'll be an incubator where things can happen. I would like to see greater education on these things in the general public that's beyond just the little pockets that have gained information. If once you're involved in an issue, you think it's really taking off because you become absorbed in that little corner of
Sure.
people talking to each other.
Yeah.
And
But I do think you're right. I think there's a lot happening and, we've seen kind of the tides turn, but it does feel like, we're getting to a point where, real progress can be
yeah,
made. And, I just wanna commend you, for what you're doing,
thank you,
and we'll make sure that people find how to connect with the Reid Foundation.
thank you,
But I believe that the short order and the progress is really happening largely in part because of initiatives like yours. People really educating and lobbying. And what I love, and really this is um, my, it's becoming my personal passion and becoming more and more of my work. And I think what I'll spend some part of my time doing for the rest of my life is seeing how our lives, in that divine
yeah,
architecture that's so perfect, really makes so much sense to lead us to service of others and each other. And that's what I hear when I hear your life. You at 11 years old are drawn into this political world, um, and you knew it, and you go through all the iterations of that, but today you use all of it in the service of humanity, in the most unexpected way,
yeah.
right? And that is so beautiful.
That goes to what we said earlier. God knows what He's doing
Yeah,
with each of us.
yeah,
Every one of us has a critical mission that we're here for.
yeah.
And maybe, you know, uh, we don't even recognize it when it's happening or
Right.
the individual life that we've touched. We're each here for a purpose.
Yeah.
And when we see that in one another, when we begin to see God in the one before us, we no longer are looking for separation and division and comparison.
Mhm,
We're looking for unity, compassion.
mhm,
We're looking for the good things, joy,
mhm.
gratitude.
Mm, peace.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
these are the
Love.
rest is a lie
Yeah.
that leads to misery,
Yeah,
and,
it's so true. It's
we're
it's so simple,
yeah.
and it's so, complex, but,
Well, thank you for being the asset, that you've chosen to invest your time and energy to just creating conversations, that lead to unity and optimism.
Mhm. Thank you. Let me just ask you one last question, and, I'll give you a chance to, share some final thoughts, although you just said some beautiful things. Um, when you talk about this calling, this purpose, discovering why we're here, um, I'm thinking about the importance of surrendering, you know, that
Yeah.
you say you don't always know it when it's going on, and you kinda tapping into that calling at an early age. I have been in resistance, you know, throughout my life along the way, to what maybe felt like it was a part of that calling and have surrendered to it, you know, more and more as time has gone on. You know, maybe you could just share some wisdom on the importance of, you know, being able to recognize it and surrendering to it.
Yeah, I think surrendering happens after you've fought a great battle,
Yeah.
and so release
Mhm.
and let go
Mhm.
is the hardest thing to do
Mhm.
because it's counterintuitive, and, but the reality is that's where joy is found.
Yeah.
And so you can you have to walk through the tough road
Yeah.
and get your feet bloody, I guess, to find out that at the end of the day, it's really a better life when you're focused on something that's greater than yourself.
Yeah, and I don't know how much of this will be seen visually, but, you know, in being with you here today, I have seen the emotion and the tears and the, feelings of the pain, and I've also seen you smile when you talk about what you just said, you know, and so it's a full life,
Yeah.
but, you know, that pain, uh still can be felt, and ultimately you can smile again, you know, and, I just give you so much,
Thank you. Thank you, Brett.
you know, I just have a lot of respect and
Thank you.
admiration for how you've moved through the pain and, you know, have found, you know, the smiles and the service,
Yeah.
and, you know, God bless you.
I think we're all here together for that greater purpose. And as I said, when we see God in each other, we realize that each each of us are the same and
Yeah,
have that higher purpose and ultimate purpose and eternal purpose.
yeah. Amen. We'll leave it there. Thanks, Rex. It's been great.